This is Kentucky's Voice Radio, covering the latest state and local issues with Tom Fallbush, Bob Scott, and Jim Waters.
Well, hello, Kentuckiana. I'm Jim Waters. Welcome to Kentucky's Voice, the conservative, common-sense, Christian-based voice of the Commonwealth. No corporate spin here, no big tech censorship, just Kentucky truth, unbridled, unapologetic, and conservative. We thank you for joining us today. You're listening to this Thursday edition of Kentucky's Voice right now on 970 WGTK, Louisville's conservative news talk powerhouse, and we're streaming on our social media platforms. You can also catch the show on WBNA TV 21 in the greater Louisville, Kentuckiana area this afternoon at 12:34 and 7. Today, we continue our series of one-on-one interviews with the three major Republican candidates for the U.S. Senate seat currently and long held by Mitch McConnell, who is not seeking re-election. We're sitting down with each of them separately so Kentucky conservatives can hear clear, unfiltered answers on the issues that matter most. And I want to recognize our partners in this process who have contributed ideas, thoughts about policies and questions that should be asked of the candidates. Kentucky Right to Life, the Commonwealth Policy Center, Kentuckians for Freedom, the Louisville Tea Party, Warren County Conservatives, the Andrew Cooperrider Show, Love and Lordship, and the Family Foundation of Kentucky. They're all great partners who have provided many insightful questions, and we're going to try to get to as many of those as we can. And you can support our efforts, by the way, with a one-time or monthly gift by texting 502-571-0970 or by going to Kentucky Voice, kyvoice.org. This is the second in our series of interviews with the three Republican primary candidates for the U.S. Senate seat. Daniel Cameron made his case on Tuesday. Next Wednesday, Nate Morris will be with us. And today we're joined by Congressman Andy Barr, who has represented Kentucky's 6th congressional district since 2013 in the U.S. House of Representatives, where he is a senior member of the House Financial Services Committee, and he serves as well as chairman of the subcommittee on financial institutions, a position he was reappointed to in January 2025 for the 119th Congress. And I think the first time I met you, Congressman Barr, you were Deputy General Counsel to former Kentucky Governor Ernie Fletcher. That's back a ways, is it not?
It is. It's been a joy to get to know you, and I appreciate your advocacy for the conservative cause.
Well, thank you, Congressman Barr, and thanks for making time for us today in a busy schedule on Kentucky's Voice. We're going to dive into the issues in just a moment, but first I wanted to give you the opportunity that we're giving all candidates to tell Kentucky voters what you believe differentiates you from your primary opponents.
Well, I think there's three major points about why I'm the right choice for Republican voters in this primary and what separates me apart from my opponents. First of all, when a lot of candidates like to talk about supporting President Trump, I'm the only candidate in this race who's actually doing it. I'm in the Congress now as the 2024 chairman of President Trump's campaign in Kentucky. And as the first member of the federal delegation to endorse President Trump before the 2024 election, someone who worked shoulder to shoulder with President Trump during his first term and now working with him in this term. And don't take my word for it. The president himself in a rally in northern Kentucky just a few weeks ago said that I've been a warrior for his agenda and that I've been with him all the way. I've been with him all the way on voting for the largest tax cuts in American history. All the way on securing the border and tripling immigration enforcement funding, supporting his border wall infrastructure, all the way on rolling back burdensome regulations and leading the fight to roll back the Dodd-Frank law, a bill that he signed into law, and working with him all the way to eliminate DEI and to strengthen our military and to defeat the Iranian threat. And I've been with them all the way to unleash American energy dominance. Secondly, I'm the only candidate in this race who actually has experience to deliver for Kentucky, and I can hit the ground running on day one. And finally, I come from the one swing district in the Commonwealth of Kentucky, and you owe it to your philosophy to win. If you're a Republican, take Kentucky off the map.
Yes.
I am the only proven winner against Democrats and can block the Democrats.
Thank you, Congressman Barr. Stay with us. More to come.
Now, back to Kentucky's Voice Radio, online at kyvoice.org.
And thanks for joining us here on this Thursday edition of Kentucky's Voice. You can support our efforts with a one-time or monthly gift by texting 502-571-0970 or by going to kyvoice.org. We're bringing you, the Republican voters of our Commonwealth, a series of one-on-one interviews with the major GOP primary candidates for the U.S. Senate seat, currently held by Kentucky's longtime senior senator, former Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. We're joined today by Congressman Andy Barr. Immigration reform, Congressman, has certainly been a top priority for the Trump administration. First of all, overall, what grade would you give President Trump for actually succeeding in immigration reform and some of the policies that he had campaigned on? Do you think he's done what he's promised to do? And is this going to make our country safer and better? And give us your perspective on that.
Well, absolutely. He deserves an A+. He's done what he's promised he was going to do, which is secure the border and increase immigration enforcement. And I appreciate that. It's made the country a safer place. And I've been a partner every step of the way with him on that. In his first term, I voted for both bills that he endorsed. And then after those pieces of legislation failed, I led the fight in court defending the president's legal authority to build the wall using defense appropriations funds. I wrote the amicus brief that defended the president's authority to use those defense and military construction funds because that is national security. And in this term, I voted for the One Big Beautiful Bill, which increased funding by $170 billion to Border Patrol, border security, infrastructure, technology, re-implementing the Remain in Mexico policy, asylum reform, and tripling ICE funding for deportations of illegal criminal aliens and getting cartels and drugs out of our country. I've been a partner with him side by side on that. These false attacks against me that I'm for amnesty are absurd. They're absolutely not true. Again, I voted to triple ICE funding at the Department of Homeland Security. It's resulted in self-deportations. It's resulted in over 600,000 deportations. And the president deserves an A+ because we have the lowest level of illegal border crossings in over 50 years in this country. And as a member of the Select Committee on the Strategic Competition with China, this is a big deal. We saw a surge in illegal Chinese nationals, military-aged men, crossing the southern border under Biden's policies. I have a perfect A+ rating from Numbers USA, the leading border security and immigration enforcement organization in the country. And, oh, by the way, the president's head of border security in the country, the new Secretary of Homeland Security, Markwayne Mullin, has endorsed me in this race because he knows I'm the border security champion and immigration enforcement champion working with this president.
So all three candidates have said they want to deport violent criminals and those who commit crimes after entering the country. But unlawful entry itself is a federal crime, right? So are you in favor of deporting every single person who has entered the country or attempted to enter the country at an unauthorized time or place, or folks who have evaded inspection by immigration officers? And so give us your perspective on how you would propose to do this, if I assume the answer is yes to that.
Well, it is yes, because look, that's the law. That's the existing law of the land that we have in this country. That's why I voted to triple ICE funding. At the end of the day, ICE is prioritizing folks in jails, and that's altogether appropriate because that's where illegals who have committed additional crimes, in addition to the crime of illegally coming into our country. And again, the country is a safer place because of this. I also want to make another important point. Our nation is a nation of immigrants, but we're also a nation of laws. And it is dishonoring legal immigrants to our country. It's dishonoring legal guest workers in our country. It's dishonoring green card holders and people who work hard to go through the legal process to become citizens. It dishonors them to allow folks to cut in line or come into our country without following the proper procedures. I've supported immigration enforcement in a number and a range of ways, including asylum reform as well. So these are all examples of how I have been a leader on this issue. Senator Tom Cotton and I are leading the effort to make sure that states, to pressure states to not issue commercial driver's licenses to illegal immigrants who can't speak English. We've seen a number of deadly cases, sad cases, where illegal immigrants have been given commercial driver's licenses by rogue blue states that have resulted in terrible traffic accidents. So there's a range of pieces of legislation I've supported. I've voted to impeach Alejandro Mayorkas for lying to the American people and helping to open up the southern border during his term and systematically refusing to enforce our federal immigration laws. I co-sponsored and voted for the Laken-Riley Act to make sure that we can deport these individuals who have been charged with crimes, but for whatever reason were not deported when they should have been. I support the program that would allow local law enforcement to work with the Immigration and Customs Enforcement to kind of supercharge the immigration enforcement efforts that are going on in our country to help us.
Let me ask you about this too. What are some measures that you would support to encourage more self-deportation? We've seen that this could be an effective way also of achieving mass deportation, could it not?
Yeah, my colleague and friend Randy Fine, who, by the way, graduated with me from Henry Clay High School in 1992. He and I think, are the only classmates from the same high school serving in Congress together at the same time right now. Randy has a bill, No Welfare for Illegals Act. I'm a co-sponsor of that bill. It would not only reduce the incentives for illegal immigration and people coming to the country and ripping off the American taxpayer, becoming dependent on taxpayer funding, U.S. citizens' taxes, but it would also decrease spending, which obviously we need to do. So it's a spending reduction measure. It's a fiscal responsibility measure. It is, I would argue, it is a DOGE priority to eliminate these improper payments to illegals, but it's also eliminating the incentives, the perverse incentives for illegals to come to our country, not to pursue the American dream, but to bilk the American taxpayer.
So kind of along that lines, our other must-ask question in this category was, do you believe the Constitution grants birthright citizenship to any person born in the United States, even if their parents are here illegally?
Well, I certainly support the administration's efforts to clarify that issue in the Supreme Court. But I've also introduced a constitutional amendment that would prohibit birthright citizenship when the baby that's born is born of illegal parents, because that's not what the Constitution contemplated originally. By the way, if you're a diplomat and you have a child in the United States, that child is not entitled to birthright citizenship in the United States. So why should a child born to illegals be eligible for birthright citizenship? I think that's wrong. That's why I've introduced a constitutional amendment. Look, if you're in this country, if you're an immigrant, a legal immigrant to this country, if you have a green card, if you're a citizen, if you're a naturalized citizen to this country, obviously that's what birthright citizenship is for. It's for that child. It should not be for birthing tourism, and we've seen birthing tourism that threatens our national security. A Chinese national pled guilty recently to running a birthing tourism scheme where Chinese elites would pay $80,000 to secure birthright citizenship for their children, and then they would leave their children here. That is not what the Constitution contemplated. That's why I have offered this constitutional amendment if the administration's efforts in the Supreme Court fails.
Let's turn for a moment just to ICE, and this will have to be a shorter answer, but do you support ICE agents wearing masks during operations, or would you support requiring them to remove those masks? And what's your thinking on that?
No, I oppose the proposed reform that would allow radical leftists that violate federal law by interfering with or attacking or harassing federal law enforcement in the course of them fulfilling their responsibilities as law enforcement officers, allowing them to dox those individuals. We've clearly seen what the far extreme left wants to do, throwing rocks and attacking federal law enforcement officers to intimidate them and impede their important work to enforce federal immigration law. So it's just like anything else. When federal law enforcement or any law enforcement is given the tools to protect themselves, in this case, concealing their identity, regrettably, because we've seen cases of far left radicals going after the families of these law enforcement officers. So are there some legitimate reforms for ICE? Sure. And Tom Homan has offered those reasonable common sense reforms. But radical left-wing Democrats refuse to even consider that because they want to dox and reveal the identities so that radical left-wing protesters and agitators can identify and harass law enforcement and their families. And that's just plain wrong. Also, this idea of a judicial warrant for every single immigration enforcement action is simply unreasonable. Administrative warrants are appropriate in cases of deportation efforts, and they always have been, and they're perfectly constitutional. And by the way, not all removal proceedings require a judicial warrant.
Yeah. Well, Congressman Andy Barr is joining us in this series of conversations and interviews with Republican primary candidates for the U.S. Senate seat currently held by Mitch McConnell, who has said he will not run for re-election. Congressman Barr, stay with us, and you stay with us right here on Kentucky's Voice. When we come back, the national debt, energy, political independence, and I'm sure more right here. We'll have more with Republican U.S. Senate candidate Congressman Andy Barr on the other side. And you can reach us at 502-571-0970. One-time or a monthly gift, support this effort for conservative media. Stay tuned.
Back to Kentucky's Voice Radio, online at kyvoice.org.
Well, you're listening to this show right now on 970 WGTK, Louisville's conservative news talk powerhouse, where you can catch Kentucky's Voice weekdays from 11 a.m. to noon. We're also streaming on social media, so you never have to miss wherever in the world you may be. And also catch us on television later today, 12:30, 4 and 7 p.m. on WBNA TV 21 right here throughout Kentuckiana. We're bringing you, the Republican voters of our Commonwealth, a series of one-on-one interviews with the major GOP primary candidates for the U.S. Senate seat currently held by Kentucky's longtime senior senator and former Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. With us today is Congressman Andy Barr, one of the three major candidates running for that office. Congressman Barr, before we turn now to some other policy issues on the domestic front, Let me ask you about Senator McConnell. He served 41 years in the United States Senate. He said he's not running again. Kentucky legislators intend to put a statue of Senator McConnell in the Capitol. What do you think the senator's legacy will be?
I think Senator McConnell's greatest legacy will be a conservative Supreme Court and a conservative federal judiciary. He deserves tremendous credit for holding up the disastrous nomination of Merrick Garland to allow President Trump to nominate Neil Gorsuch to replace, I think, the greatest Associate Justice in Supreme Court history, Antonin Scalia. I am a great admirer of Justice Scalia, and this president deserves enormous credit in working with Senator McConnell. Senator McConnell deserves enormous credit for working with this president. And Don McGahn, as general counsel at the time in the first term, Leonard Leo at the Federalist Society, to not only make sure that we had 3 additional originalist justices on the Supreme Court, but to populate the entire federal judiciary, hundreds of new Court of Appeals and district judges who understand that the role of the federal judiciary is to interpret the law according to the original meaning of the Constitution and according to the original meaning of the text of the statutes, not to make up the law, not to be a super legislature. So I think that's one of the greatest legacies of Mitch McConnell. And of course, obviously, we are losing influence. He was the Senate leader for a number of years. We're losing influence in the Senate. And so I think Kentucky Republicans have an important choice to make now. And I'm the only candidate in this race who actually has the experience to hit the ground running on day one. I don't have a learning curve. I'm doing the job now. I have existing relationships with this president, with this cabinet. I can call up members of the cabinet. I do talk to members of the cabinet routinely, whether it's Commerce Secretary Lutnick or Energy Secretary Wright or Transportation Secretary Duffy or EPA Administrator Lee Zeldin. Scott Bessent is the Treasury Secretary. I have jurisdiction over Scott Bessent. I'm the chairman of the subcommittee with jurisdiction over the Federal Reserve. I talked to the chairman of the Federal Reserve. I know Kevin Warsh, President Trump's new nominee to be the next chairman of the Fed. So I have existing experience and relationships. I have relationships with the senators. I've worked with many of them. I came into the Congress with many of them. I'm good friends with the Speaker of the House, the Majority Leader. As I said, I was endorsed by Mark Wayne Mullen, the Secretary of Homeland Security. I've been endorsed by the Customs and Border Protection Agency that has been, populated by President Trump's appointments. Yeah. So I can get the job done, and I've experienced passing legislation. I know the process. Right. That separates me from these other candidates.
Where might you diverge from how Senator McConnell has operated? Where might there be some differences here?
Well, I'll give you one that's happening right now. Senator McConnell, and I think well-intentioned, wanted to protect kids from some of these hemp-derived drinks because they were not regulated. And I do believe that there should be a level playing field with other adult beverages. But I also want to help Kentucky farmers. And so Senator McConnell and I have a difference of opinion. And so what I'm pursuing on industrial hemp and our hemp farmers is to try to create a regulatory framework that would protect our kids and create a level playing field with Kentucky bourbon and other adult beverages, but also give a lifeline to our hemp farmers in Kentucky. And that is a difference between me and Senator McConnell right now. I'd say there are other examples as well, especially on federal spending. I voted against the so-called bipartisan infrastructure bill that Senator McConnell supported, not because we don't need investment in infrastructure, but because we missed a golden opportunity in that bill. There was too many green projects, wasteful spending that really did not deserve the focus of infrastructure investment in this country. And we didn't have enough permitting reform, regulatory reform in that bill. And finally, that bill missed an immense opportunity to finance infrastructure through the private sector. I'm on the Financial Services Committee, and we have not unleashed the power of banks and asset managers and life insurance companies, all of which want to deploy trillions of dollars of private capital to rebuild America's crumbling infrastructure. And we just had a difference of opinion there. Senator McConnell voted for that bill. I voted against it.
Let me ask you this about spending. All the major candidates have acknowledged in prior forums and interviews that the national debt is a serious problem. What specific areas of federal spending do you think are ripe and ready to be cut? You know, President Trump, for example, in just the past few days proposed significant cuts to the TSA. And he also, along with that, suggested turning to the private sector for screening, say at smaller airports, being more efficient with this huge agency that has 60,000 employees. Do you support this kind of move?
Well, I'm a member of what's called the Yellow Pages Caucus, which basically says that if the private sector can provide the service, the federal government should not. And remember, the federal government in Article 1, Section 8, it is a government of limited and defined powers, enumerated powers. The federal government should do nothing other than those few and enumerated specified powers. We need to get back to that basic idea of the original constitutional design. My good friend Jody Arrington, also a father of young kids, he is the chairman of the Budget Committee. He's one of my best friends in Congress. He talks about reversing the curse. And he was telling me the other day, the Government Accountability Office, the GAO, has identified this year alone over $500 billion, $500 billion in improper payments. We need to tackle those improper payments, fraud, waste, and abuse in government agencies to help pay for any supplemental that we plus up national defense as a result of this Iran program. I'm a member of the Doge Caucus, proud to be a member of the Doge Caucus. I voted for the rescissions package. And Jim, I am the only candidate in this U.S. Senate primary who's actually sponsored and voted for the Balanced Budget Amendment. The only candidate in this race who's voted for the Fiscal Responsibility Act, which cut spending over $2 trillion, that co-sponsored the Limit Save and Growth Act, that would have reduced spending by $3 trillion, that voted for the Big Beautiful Bill, that helped write the Big Beautiful Bill, which is the largest deficit reduction bill in history.
You got about a minute left here in this segment. I wanted to ask you how you balance, though, you know, as a U.S. Senator, how are you going to balance? One of the things that Senator McConnell would campaign on was what he was able to bring back to Kentucky. So how do you participate in that earmarks process to bring federal projects here, but also balance that with the urgent need to reduce spending and lower the national debt? How does that work?
Well, first of all, I oppose an earmark system that adds to spending. To the extent there is congressionally directed spending, I actually think that's consistent with the Constitution. Congress has the power of the purse, not the executive branch. So I actually support bringing power back to members of Congress to direct funds as long as it is subtracting, not adding, subtracting to spending. Instead of just giving the taxpayer dollars to unaccountable, unelected bureaucrats in the executive branch and allowing them to direct those appropriations to big blue cities, I want members of Congress to subtract from their discretionary powers and direct those resources so that there is a return on investment for taxpayers back to the communities where the taxpayers actually live. So that's how I would support it. I also support guardrails around congressionally directed spending so that there's no bridges to nowhere, that we're talking about hard infrastructure where there's an ROI or where there's a national security ramification involved, or whether there's public safety, like supporting law enforcement, local law enforcement. Those, to me, that is investment that makes sense, that's within the constitutional authority.
We're speaking with Kentucky 6th District Congressman Andy Barr, who's running to be the Republican nominee for Senator Mitch McConnell's seat. Back, talk energy, Iran, and more with the Congressman. Stay with us on Kentucky's Voice. Don't go away.
Now, back to Kentucky's Voice Radio, online at kyvoice.org.
Thanks for staying with us here on Kentucky's Voice this Thursday edition. Jim Waters in with you today. And I'm joined by a whole lot of folks that you don't necessarily see on here today, but who have partnered with us to bring you this series on the Republican primary candidates for the U.S. Senate race for the seat currently held by Senator Mitch McConnell. We're sitting down with each of them separately so Kentucky conservatives can hear clear, unfiltered answers on the issues that matter most to you. And I want to recognize partners in this process who helped us plan this event with questions and policy areas that we wanted to make sure we're covering, they covered. And those are Kentucky Right to Life, the Commonwealth Policy Center, Kentuckians for Freedom, the Louisville Tea Party, Warren County Conservatives, the Andrew Cooper-Ryder Show, Love and Lordship, and the Family Foundation of Kentucky. They're all great partners who have provided many insightful questions here. We'll get to as many of those as we can. You can support our efforts here at Kentucky's Voice with a one-time or monthly gift by texting 502-571-0970 or by going to kyvoice.org. This is the second in our series of interviews with the three Republican primary candidates for the Senate seat. Daniel Cameron made his case here on Tuesday. Nate Morris will be with us next Wednesday, but today we're just delighted to have with us 6th District Congressman Andy Barr joining us. And Congressman, thank you again for taking time to join us today as we move into the second half of our program. Let's move for a moment to energy. We can't have an interview like this in Kentucky without talking about energy, I don't think. Let me ask you, as far as federal restrictions that limit American energy development, especially here in coal-powered Kentucky, how would you support that as a U.S. Senator? What would you do would you lead on that issue? Would you advance some issues that could really help our energy industry, particularly here in our state?
Well, I'm the only candidate running for Senate who actually won a seat in Congress running against Barack Obama's war on coal. And I'm the only candidate in this race for U.S. Senate that actually has presented a plan to unleash American energy dominance and Kentucky energy dominance to power the technologies of the future. I unveiled that plan, that very detailed plan in Harlan County, Kentucky, in the eastern Kentucky coal fields, the world's capital of coal mining in Harlan County. I've been talking about it a lot in the western Kentucky coal fields. Kentucky is blessed as an energy dominant state if we have the political will to unleash it. We need to bring back coal. We need to put our coal miners back to work. But we also have enormous amounts of natural gas infrastructure running through Kentucky. We have some natural gas reserves as well here in Kentucky. We also, I've been an advocate and champion for the nuclear power industry in far western Kentucky. I advocated for the DOE, Department of Energy, investment of almost $1 billion in the former gaseous diffusion plant, a $900 million grant to General Matter, and also a grant to Global Laser Enrichment for uranium enrichment. That's what we need. We need enrich uranium for nuclear fuel. That's what's holding us back for nuclear. And then finally, Kentucky is blessed with the most navigable waterways in the United States, second only to Alaska. So we have untapped hydroelectric potential. But here's the bottom line. We are in a race with China for AI dominance and the other technologies of the future, quantum computing, digital assets, blockchain. All of this requires enormous amounts of power. AI in particular, AI data center power demand is set to triple over the next 5 years in this country. Electricity demand is skyrocketing precisely at the time when we have made a massive strategic error under Obama and Biden to prematurely retire 290 coal-fired power plants in this country over the last 16 years. We have lost over 130 gigawatts of coal-fired power generation capacity in this country over the last 16 years, and we need to bring it back in order to win the race for AI against the Chinese Communist Party. China is building 2 new coal power plants a week. So my plan involves many different pieces of legislation, but I've been working with Howard Lutnick and Doug Burgum on this, the president's chairman of his National Energy Dominance Council. And it's called the Securing Reliable Power for Advanced Technologies Act, which would provide a mechanism under the Defense Production Act to guarantee investment into new coal-fired power plants or upgrading existing coal-fired power fleet so that we can, in fact, provide the baseload, firm, dispatchable power that is required to win the race for AI. Jensen Huang, the CEO of NVIDIA, the most sophisticated chip maker in the world, who spent some childhood years in Clay County, Kentucky at Oneida Baptist Institute, he told me face-to-face that Eastern Kentucky has tremendous opportunity to power the AI technology stack, and he believes in it. And he's the one who said that we are only nanoseconds ahead of China when it comes to AI dominance. This is very important for national security, right, because AI is going into all kinds of military applications, autonomous drones, war planning, and intelligence gathering.
Yeah, there's a lot of controversy over these centers, right, and where they're built. And any thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I believe in local control. I believe in local zoning and planning, and it's ultimately going to be a decision for local jurisdictions to decide whether or not they will site an AI data center. In some places, it makes more sense than other places. Where we have pristine farm and productive farmland, it probably doesn't make sense. But on a reclaimed coal mine, or on top of a sanitation site or a brownfield, it would make enormous amounts of sense.
And it would help and what you're saying is really, with all the energy that we have, the resources, this is a great opportunity for us.
Yeah, yes, and I applaud the president for saying that these data centers have to bring power of their own. And I think you could put nuclear and coal-fired power behind the meter, or gas behind the meter with these data centers. There's so much private capital being invested. They will bring their own power sources, and the data centers themselves can actually throttle up and be a supplier of power into the grid and help sustain and enhance our grid reliability, not detract from it, as long as there is behind-the-meter power sources that can contribute electricity to the grid.
Right. We're speaking with Congressman Andy Barr, 6th District Congressman from Kentucky. And he's joining us today as we interview the candidates for the soon-to-be open U.S. Senate seat, the Republican candidates. And let's turn for a moment to Iran and what's happening there and what you think maybe should happen. Congressman Barr, President Trump has indicated the deal must be reached to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, or Iran will pay a terrible price. What do you think about the president's policy? What is the best solution there? And is it important for the U.S. to remain involved there? And what is the overall goal? These are all questions we've heard quite a bit about this situation.
Well, both Operation Midnight Hammer last June that obliterated Iran's nuclear infrastructure, in addition to Operation Epic Fury, they have been remarkable strategic successes for the United States and our allies. This president is not starting a war, or did not start a war with Iran. He's ending a 47-year war. Remember, Iran is the world's leading state sponsor of terrorism, responsible for murdering thousands of Americans over the last 47 years, taking Americans hostage, starting with the hostage taking at our embassy in 1979, the bombing of the Marine barracks in Beirut in the early 1980s, the bombing of the USS Cole, thousands of American service members maimed and killed by roadside bombs by Shiite militia groups in Iraq. And October 7th, Americans, in addition to Israelis, slaughtered and butchered by Iranian proxies Hamas. They have destabilized the region. They've aspired for a nuclear weapon. They are the world's leading state sponsor of terrorism. And remember, unlike the Nazis concealed their intentions for the Jewish people. The mullahs in Tehran were telling us what they wanted to do to the Jewish people, annihilate them, take Israel off the map. But remember, in the same breath that they were promising to wipe Israel off the map, they were chanting death to America. Their nuclear warheads that they were developing, their ballistic missile capability that they were developing, it was not just for Israel. They were intending on building a nuclear umbrella to protect them, to allow them to export terrorism, and to threaten our homeland with an intercontinental ballistic missile and nuclear weapon. So this operation, which has been a remarkable success, which has taken out over 12,300 missile, drone, aircraft, naval, military assets of the Iranian regime, has been a remarkable success. In addition to degrading their military capabilities, This operation, Epic Fury, is also degrading the defense industrial base so that the Iranian regime, the successor regime, also hardline, will not be able to reconstitute easily. The last phase of this is, of course, to secure the Strait of Hormuz, to settle the energy markets. Gas prices are up temporarily, but in the long run, securing the strait without a military-capable Iran will lead to more stable global energy markets in the long run. Thank goodness this president is pursuing an energy dominance strategy.
Yeah, and he basically said that it's going to be a short-term sacrifice. I think short-term is important here, though, don't you? I think the longer this goes,
absolutely. This is not going to be. And I've had many briefings from General Kane, the chairman of Joint Chiefs, and Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, and Secretary of State Marco Rubio. There will not be a U.S. occupation of Tehran. And thank God we were able to deliver those airmen back after their harrowing episode. But what an amazing display of capability.
Hey, Congressman, want to get to one last question real quick, and it's going to have to be kind of a quick answer. I apologize. But do you support tariffs or other trade measures that are seen as protecting American manufacturing, reducing our reliance on foreign supply chains? What about tariffs?
Yeah, and just to finish the thought on Iran, this president is restoring peace through strength, deterrence. We're restoring deterrence not just with respect to Iran, but believe me, Beijing, Moscow, and Pyongyang and Havana, they are paying attention to this president's selective use of Connecticut military force to restore peace and deterrence. On tariffs and on trade, I support the president's trade policy precisely because I believe in free trade. We don't have free trade. We haven't had free trade. We haven't had reciprocal trade. We've been getting ripped off both by enemies, adversaries, and even partners and allies who don't level the playing field. We give them access to our markets, but we don't have access to their markets. So I supported USMCA. I support continuing using the tool of tariffs and other tools of economic statecraft, including sanctions over which I have jurisdiction, export controls, and other tools to level the playing field and increase access, market access. So I've worked with Howard Lutnick on opening up access, for example, to India for our bourbon exports in Kentucky, increasing jobs and prosperity for the people of Kentucky, because we're going to finally have access to that market of 1.4 billion whiskey drinkers in India.
Great stuff. Appreciate that clarity. Final segment of today's Kentucky's Voice coming up with Congressman Andy Barr. We'll get into pro-life and some other issues right here. Don't go away. You don't want to miss this last segment. Stay with us.
Kentucky's Voice Radio, online at kyvoice.org.
Well, welcome back to Kentucky's Voice here on this Thursday. I'm Jim Waters. Thanks for joining us today, and this is being heard on 970 WGTK, the conservative news talk powerhouse of Greater Louisville and Kentuckiana. You can also catch us on the major social media platforms and also on television at 12:34 and 7 this evening. Plenty of opportunities. If you want to hear this interview again, or you didn't get to hear all of it, or whatever the case may be, there are plenty of opportunities to go back and hear it again. We're bringing you, in fact, today and in the next few days, the Republican voters of our Commonwealth, a series of one-on-one interviews with the major GOP primary candidates for the U.S. Senate seat currently held by Kentucky's longtime senior senator and former Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. We're joined today by Congressman Andy Barr, and next Wednesday we'll interview businessman Nate Morris. Daniel Cameron, the former Attorney General of our state, joined us on Tuesday. And so, Congressman Barr, again, thanks for joining us today. We were talking about trade right before the break, and, you know, the president's measures have, there's been some rumbling about this and grumbling about this in Kentucky with some of our industries here. How do you see this, and what perspective would you like voters to have on this? From your perspective?
Jim, it's a national security issue. We learned the hard way in COVID that we are painfully over-dependent on China for critical minerals, for personal protective equipment, medical equipment, medicines, semiconductors, and we need supply chain resiliency. And so any policies, whether they're trade or tax policies that help build up domestic manufacturing capabilities and help onshore and nearshore our supply chains, that enhances our not only our economic security, but our national security. And that's why I was very glad to support the One Big Beautiful Bill, the reconciliation bill, the Working Families Tax Cut Plan. I'm the only candidate in this race who actually helped to write it and vote for it. And because of the Made in America manufacturing tax provisions in there that incentivize investment in manufacturing in the United States, Apple made a huge investment in my district in Harrodsburg, Kentucky, in the Corning plant, and all of the Gorilla Glass that will be on iPhones and Apple Watches. All of that manufacturing is coming back from China to Harrodsburg, Kentucky, with a $2.5 billion investment right there in the 6th Congressional District in the Commonwealth of Kentucky because of my vote and this president's tax and trade policies. That's a good thing, and I was proud to be part of that. The other candidates in this race cannot say that. They don't have the experience of working to actually deliver for Kentucky in that way, and I'm proud of that.
Well, let's turn, Congressman Barr, to pro-life issues. Following the overturning, of course, of Roe v. Wade, conservatives are a little nervous maybe about how Congress is going to view its role in protecting unborn life. So I'll ask you, what specific pro-life legislation are you committing to advancing in Congress that builds on Kentucky's state-level pro-life movement efforts, such as nationwide funding and deployment of safe haven baby boxes at fire stations and classifying abortion-inducing drugs as controlled substances or prescription-only outside emergency hospital settings? What's your view?
Well, unlike the other candidates in this race, I actually have a record in Congress that people can look at. That's why National Right to Life has given me a perfect score. That's why I'm a member of the Congressional Pro-Life Caucus, and as a member of that caucus, signed an amicus brief encouraging the court to overturn Roe versus Wade in the Dobbs versus Jackson decision. Proud to do so. And I continue to push pro-life policies, as I have all 14 years of my time in Congress at the federal level, including my support for the Hyde Amendment to prevent taxpayer funding of abortions, prohibitions on certainly late-term abortions, partial birth abortions. I've been a co-sponsor and tireless advocate for the Born Alive Protection Act, which requires doctors and healthcare professionals to provide medical care to babies born alive in the course of abortions. And look, I'm a dad of 4 kids. I'm 52 years old and I have a 5-month-old. I'm very committed to the cause of life. Obviously, I know the beautiful miracle of life as a result of having these wonderful children, including a newborn baby girl. So I'm for saving lives and serving women and support any plan that can earn a consensus in Congress that will protect as many babies and serve as many women as possible.
We're speaking with. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Finish your point.
And so that has been my record in Congress, and people can examine that.
Well, we're speaking with Congressman Barr. Congratulations, by the way, on your new addition. And we're glad to have you with us today. You talk a lot about you have a record. And so I'm going to ask, there's some rumbling, some conservative organizations. I guess this is a head scratcher for me, and you can help me with this. Have noted some wide swings in the ratings you're getting from conservatives. For example, Heritage Action for America scored you at 98% in the 119th Congress, but only 59 in the 118th, 89 in the 116th, and 71 in the 115th. How do you respond to critics? And I want to give you an opportunity to respond to those who say that these fluctuations, including some of your votes on maybe spending bills in Congress, maybe raise some questions about your consistency as a conservative.
Well, I think the consistency issue is with the organizations. The organizations need to be consistent about how they're scoring these measures, because I'm consistent. I'm consistent on fiscal responsibility, on pro-life issues, on energy dominance, on deregulation. So I voted for it, but in scoring, it depends on what you're voting. You're scoring. Some of these organizations will score a vote for national security as a liberal vote. I don't see it that way. I'm for a strong national defense. I was raised in the era of Ronald Reagan, and for the life of me, I don't know why a so-called conservative organization would score a vote for, say, the National Defense Authorization Act or a vote for defense appropriations as a liberal vote. And yet some of these organizations will do that. So I don't know what particular votes, but if you want to talk about any particular vote, I'm happy to talk about it and defend it. But on fiscal responsibility, I'm the only candidate in this race who has actually co-sponsored a balanced budget amendment and voted for it. I'm the only candidate in this race who's voted for mandatory spending reform at the federal level, saving trillions of dollars. I'm the only the only candidate in this race who's a member of the Doge Caucus and voted for major rescissions packages. I'm the only I'm the only candidate in this race who's actually, as a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee, dismantled wasteful foreign aid by reforming USAID and blocking woke and wasteful programs that actually undermine our national security. So I take a backseat to no one when it comes to cutting wasteful spending, advancing fiscal responsibility. And yes, sometimes I vote to raise the debt limit, but to avoid a default, which would be worse for our debt overall, but only when it's accompanied by reforms, by either mandatory, recurring, compounding mandatory spending reforms or spending cuts as part of raising the debt limit to avoid a default. A default would actually cost the taxpayer more money. And as a member of the Financial Services Committee, we're doing things to strengthen the dollar's dominance and make sure the dollar remains the world's reserve currency and increase demand for treasuries and stabilize the treasury market given the huge debt load that we have. I have led the fight to decrease burdensome regulations on banks, to increase their capacity to hold treasury securities, to stabilize our debt and deficit situation. And I've supported legislation to make the United States the world crypto leader on planet Earth, to make sure that stable coins are backed by U.S. dollars, to increase demand for treasuries, to lower interest rates, and to make sure that the dollar remains the world's reserve currency.
Hey, Congressman, do you support term limits for members of Congress?
Over and over and over again, to my great frustration, I have co-sponsored a constitutional amendment to impose term limits on members of Congress. I don't believe in self-term limits, because you basically take out all the members of Congress who actually support term limits, and you leave the people in Congress who oppose them. But to my frustration, not one time in my time in Congress has there been an actual vote on the House floor on a congressional term limit or a constitutional amendment on term limits. Let me say one other thing about term limits, though.
Quickly, please.
It's the executive branch that needs term limits more than anything else. Unaccountable, unelected bureaucrats who wait out elected members of Congress, they're the ones who need the most, they're the ones who need term limits. We need to make sure that careerism in the bureaucracy is stopped.
Well, Congressman Andy Barr, one final question. We don't have enough time, but I'm going to ask it anyhow. Who will you turn to for professional and expert advice on spiritual, moral, cultural, governmental, business, military, and economic issues, all the different areas that you're required to know as a U.S. Senator? Outside of government, do you rely mostly on political colleagues, or do you have some folks outside of government that you're going to listen to and that are going to play an important role in your decision making?
Well, I'm blessed to still have my parents alive, and I've got a wonderful, supportive wife. And so my family, number one, my mother's a hospital chaplain. My father's an entrepreneur who taught me the values of perseverance and hard work and never giving up. So obviously my family, I have spiritual guidance, a number of pastors and priests and people that I've served in Bible studies with, and those are friends that I lean on for advice. And then I'm blessed with a support structure of people who are leaders in the private sector around this country, mostly in Kentucky, but around this country. Brilliant leaders in technology and in finance and in energy. And those are the experts.
Well,
and
Congressman Andy Barr, thank you. We're out of time.
Sector.
I am sorry we're out of time today, but thank you for joining us today on Kentucky's Voice. Thanks to Kentucky Right to Life, the Commonwealth Policy Center, Kentuckians for Freedom, Louisville Tea Party, Warren County Conservatives, Andrew Cooper Radio Show, Love and Lordship, and the Family Foundation of Kentucky. And thank you all for joining us. Congressman, we hope to have you back sometime. Best of luck on the rest of the campaign. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.